Now let's see an example of input and output in C. So we'll add a comment at the top of our file. And since we're going to be using standard input and output, we'll want to include the standard io.h. And let's declare a variable. We'll call it b. And let's prompt the user to enter a value for b. There are several ways to get user input, and it is something that you want to be careful of because there's ways to introduce potentially the opportunity for a bug or a Stack Overflow type error. And we'll deal with that later. For now, we're going to use Scanf. And with Scanf, we're going to start off with a control sequence. So the control sequence is a string, and that string is going to tell C what data type to expect. And to tell it to expect an integer, we use %d. Now we need to tell Scanf where to put this value after it reads it. And we're going to tell it to store it in the variable b, but we're not going to just say b. We're actually going to store it at the address of b. And to indicate that, we use an ampersand before b. That's the C reference operator. We'll definitely get into a lot more of that later. But for now, just when you're using scanf into a variable, just put the ampersand there. And then to print that value, we're going to need to put another control sequence. So that's a integer, so we'll use %d, and then a new line character. We didn't need one above because when the user pressed enter, it would go to a new line. And then we need to tell C what variable to print, and we'll say b. This control sequence, it's the first control sequence in this string. So it will get filled when C does the output with the value of the variable of the first variable. We'll save that. And then we'll compile. And when we run this, we'll give it an integer 10, and it'll tell us that we typed 10. If we give it a non-integer type, we'll get some sort of random input, and that's just because of how C works. We'll talk about that later in the semester.